A lot going on today. Fun stuff. The Dodgers are going to the White House. No controversy. They're going to be saluted for their world title. Everybody's showing up. This really feels different, Trump, too. But let's get to the big three.
Number 3.
Bibi Netanyahu is here. We expect he and President Trump to talk about these tariffs. Even though the U.S. and Israel are the best of friends, Israel still got hit with 17% tariffs on Liberation Day.
Yeah, Israel Prime Minister in the White House talk trade, Gaza and Iran nukes. He can expect support and cooperation on all three as the Western world focuses on getting the remaining hostages out of captivity.
Number 2.
We're working every day together. We're very close. We're wanting to deliver this one big, beautiful, glamorous bill that President Trump has been talking about so we can put the DOGE cuts in there. We can get fiscal responsibility under control, and we can look towards to balance our budget.
Senator Mark Wayne Mullen, the big, beautiful deal framework in the Senate, but the Republican House not liking it a lot. The president's pushing both sides together. It's going to be one of the most important things Trump's ever does in the White House.
Number 1.
So the fact is the countries are angry and retaliating. And by the way, coming to the table, I got a report from the USTR last night that more than 50 countries have reached out to the president to begin a negotiation.
Yep, but will they take those talks and those calls? Kevin Hassett was just on with us on Fox and Friends after appearing on ABC, and he didn't indicate whether the president's looking to do a deal or not. Tariff trauma. Markets don't like the massive global tariffs, but at least 50 nations are willing to talk to us. Question, is the president looking to talk to them? So right now the market's about 37,000, drops 944. Charlie Hurt, this is another one of those times that we're going to remember, right?
Yeah. No, I think what we're watching right now from President Trump right now on this, I mean, it's the biggest gamble that we've ever probably seen. You know, politicians they don't like to go through pain. And this is a guy who set out what he wanted to do. He ran his campaign on it. It's something he's been talking about a long time. And he's willing to withstand a lot of pain, obviously. And I think that, we talked to Peter Doocy earlier this morning. And I tend to, obviously Peter has a great sense of what's going on in the White House. And I think that he's got a pretty good read on it, that Trump is okay with this level of pain right now if it means that he can get a really, 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 really big deal out of it. In some time.
I know, but it's a lot of the pain it's not just him. I mean, it's the American people.
Well,
it's
but that's what
businesses.
I mean.
Yeah. So the Dow futures are down 3%, and now it looks like
everybody
it's a little bit worse.
wants to be loved all the time.
Right. S&P 500 has fallen 4.8%. So you have some people just wondering where they're going with it, but liking the idea of bringing manufacturing back, but it doesn't happen right away. So what he's done is 10% tariffs on nearly all foreign imports, 25% tariffs on all foreign cars, and steeper tariffs for 60 countries, including 34% tariffs on imports from China, 25% tariffs on products from South Korea. So almost every I can tell you right now who has picked up the phone and called. Japan. Japan on Saturday said they plan to speak with President Trump within this week. Italy's economic minister says we're going to de-escalate. So the Cambodia prime minister shared a letter on social media saying negotiations with the Trump administration want to do that at the earliest time, and pledging to drop tariffs to zero. Vietnam, same thing. Britain, same thing. So retaliation time for Canada, they turned around and gave us 25% tariff.
Yeah, and as always, you asked the most important question, which is, does he actually want a deal? Is he negotiating right now, or does he really just want to have tariffs in place to make money off of tariffs? And, either way, his best negotiating tactic is to sit pat for right now and say that, yeah, I'm going to wait for the best deal to come along, but he's not even revealing to anybody whether he's willing to negotiate and whether he's looking for a deal. He views that as being in the strongest position. And if you talk to people inside the administration, one of the things that they will tell you is that they believe that, for example, with China, that China's economy is way more fragile than they let on, way more fragile than maybe most people in our country realize, and that they are desperate to come to the table.
It was interesting when they entered the WTO in 2000, they had 6% of the world's manufacturing. Now they have 32%. The lead story in the Wall Street Journal today is China, unlike when Joe Biden took office, they were belligerent, they were cocky, they had a swagger. This time they said they wanted to reach out right away, and they did. They even attended his inaugural. So they thought they were going to be able to talk. They reached out to Waltz on security issues, and Waltz never got back to them. They've waited for some outreach when they said they're looking to do a deal. We did not reach out to them again. And now they said that they wanted to do a deal prior to this announcement, but they said there was no interest on the part of the Trump administration. So that could be part of the negotiation.
Yeah, and it's also an interesting, an important reminder that, we talk about the power of the United States in terms of our military. We have the strongest military on the planet, is starting to be rivaled maybe a little bit by China now, but we still have the largest, most powerful military on Earth, proven military on Earth. But, even more powerful than that is our economy. And Donald Trump recognizes that is our most powerful tool.
I just wish we did stop with the TikTok. Just cut it off. They pulled it back. There was a deal done. They pulled it back at the last minute to get back. Okay, keep it. Yeah. Go ahead. You lost this. They're using it as a spy weapon anyway. You want access to our consumers. Well, knock it off. Say, just take it. And then see how they go. See what they think.
But it does demonstrate that China wants to make a deal, because the reason that people are negotiating is not because they're concerned about the middle class in America or the manufacturing base in America. They want to negotiate because this is hurting them, and which feeds right into Donald Trump's point. And that was the point that I thought was interesting out of our conversation with Kevin Hassett this morning.
I want you to see what Dave McCormick said to me Sunday night. I asked him, because he has that international background with Bridgewater as an investor, and in China, by the way. Cut 19.
Well, I think we're much better prepared to deal with it now, in the following sense. What's happened since President Trump was president in 2017 was that you see many companies that have moved out of China because of the growing risk of China and built their supply chains throughout Southeast Asia or in other places. We need to bring some of those supply chains back to the United States, but we're less dependent on China than we were when President Trump was first in office, and that's in part because of the actions President Trump took then.
So he thinks we're more apt now to be able to absorb any type of economic pain.
Well, the other thing is that, the idea of reorienting some of these other economies back to being revolving around United States as opposed to China. And China has done a lot over the past, especially the last 4 years, making inroads all over the world and reorienting those economies around China as opposed to us. If this is something that comes out of these tariff negotiations, that we get countries like Vietnam and in Asia to reorient to the United States, that's a pretty big victory for Trump.
Here is Jim Cramer on CNBC. Cut 1.
The president doesn't try to reach out and reward these countries and companies that play by the rules in the 1987 scenario, the one where we went down 3 days and then down 22% on Monday, has the most cogency. We will not have to wait out too long, will we? We'll know by Monday.
Cut 2.
I feel like a sucker tonight because I am not a free trader, and I do not believe in free trade. And I was just as tough, if not tougher, than his people, but they screwed it up. I was very let down as someone who really, truly believes that free trade is awful for the American working person. This is what they came up with. Geez, come on, have some gumption, have some math.
See, this is the first time I thought, well, maybe the stock market will go up on Monday, was when after he predicted that it was going to go down. Look, these are, this argument that Donald Trump has been making, obviously we knew Wall Street was going to hate this. We knew that Wall Street was going to scream about this. And of course they are. But, Donald Trump, as he has throughout his entire political career, he's not listening to the same people that all of the rest of the politicians are. He's listening to completely different people. And when you have somebody like Scott Bessent talk about, well, look at gas prices, oil prices have dropped in the last couple of days. Donald Trump is listening to a completely different set of people, and it's done well for him in politics.
So I want you to see. So Jamie Dimon sends out that letter every year. To what he thinks the economic forecasts are, where we stand politically. And by the way, he's not anti-Trump. Right. Maybe he was at one point, but he's not now. But he says this. And I don't think you agree with him here. I agree with him. I think we might have a different view. Well, let's see. He said, this is a small excerpt. I think the thing is like 10 pages. The autocratic nations of the world and some of the non-aligned nations would like to see a fragmentation of America's economic alliances and a weakening of our global economic position, including our status as the world's most powerful economy, a leader in innovation, and holder of the world's reserve currency. The game will be played by many players using many tactics over many years, but our long-term strategic goals should be crystal clear: to maintain the cohesion and strength of the Western world, including their economies. If the Western world's military and economic alliances were to fragment, America itself would inevitably weaken over time. How do you feel about that?
No, I totally agree with that. And I would say that Donald Trump agrees with that. The problem is that when you look around this country and you look at what has happened to the manufacturing base, and that's the best example of it. But you look at the ability, you have these people who are we're going to have our first trillionaires before we know it. You have these multi-billionaires, and then you have places like Martinsville, Virginia, which used to be a manufacturing base, and now today, basically all they manufacture today is meth. And you look around at what a single working family on one salary could afford back in 1960 versus what you have to do and how much money you have to make today to afford a similar lifestyle. It's, there's a lot of people who are hurting, who have been passed over by this global economy. And, maybe these are not perfect answers to all of that, but Donald Trump is the first person to come along. He's the first politician to ever come along and really successfully isolate what China has done to our economy and focus on that and give voice to people who have and you can argue about it and say that you're much better off. They don't feel much better off.
So if this is, and I think this analogy is brilliant. I can't wait to share it with you. I
can't wait
to hear this. Do you know in boot camp you're convinced the drill sergeant hates you, but what the goal is to make you a fantastic Marine in Paris Island? If this is the part of boot camp for our allies, I'm all for it. And NATO, I'm all for it because it's going to make them stronger. It's going to make them think they're more of taking control of their own national interests, their own defense. Understand that economies, we're not going to coddle you like it's World War II. If the aim is to come out stronger.
Yeah.
Right?
But stop and think about it. Trump. He doesn't want America to be weak.
He doesn't want. I'm talking about our allies.
I understand that. But that's my point, is that that's exactly what he wants. He wants people to recognize, he wants our allies to recognize that that we have to get something, it does us no good to have a hollowed out manufacturing base. And also, think about this. You care a lot about national security. Can you have national security if you don't make things like steel, things like medicines in this country? I don't know that you do have national security.
And I think pharma is going to come this week. By the way, yeah.
And food, medicine, steel, being able to manufacture these things in this country. And those are all tied up in these foreign trade deals. And by the way, this whole notion of free trade, when you have quote unquote free trade in agreements that are hammered out by two governments, I don't know that that's exactly free trade. There's a political negotiation in all of these things. And so the idea that Trump is going to step in and say, you know what, I'm going to renegotiate these things and negotiate them in a way that I think better benefits the American people, I don't think that that's a departure from whatever was free trade before.
All right, listen, a couple more minutes with Charlie when we come back. This is the Bryan Kilmeade Show. Don't move. He had passed away at his home in Florida. He had colorectal cancer, and that's it. Did a great job. So why did you want to hear that again?
Just because it's just cancer. Just go with cancer.
I know. I was a little shocked how specific we got.
I was.
And by the way, I did not know that was a type of cancer. I thought that was a test to see if you had cancer. That's where I thought, let me pull back on this.
Yeah, well, this is why they teach remedial reading.
Harvard.
At Harvard, so that and the whole thing, it was actually just a test. It didn't actually go out on air. It was just a test to see how your reading skills were improving.
Let me tell you something. It went on air, and people expect nothing less.
Yeah, I haven't checked on the Twitter sphere yet, but I'm sure there will be some comments.
Right. Listen, I don't make it's a tough cancer to have. I miss Dennis the Menace already. I mean, I did not know. It's a shame that he wasn't able to capitalize on that child stardom.
Yeah.
and be more of an impact as an adult. But Jay North will be missed, 73
Yes,
years
indeed.
old.
Yes, indeed. But we still, I mean, I bet you were a Dennis the Menace when you were growing up. I bet you were
Not an
trouble.
overalls kid. You
Yeah.
wore overalls.
Yeah.
And I was a
But I
color-
bet you were like a class clown.
It
Really
was
not?
the opposite.
Really?
Yeah.
You were a nerd? You got bullied a lot? Everybody took your lunch money?
That was afraid of me.
They
I
were
want-
afraid of you?
Speaking of a
because
guy-
of your soccer skills?
Which one was soccer?
I don't know.
The world's most popular game. So here's
Communist.
yesterday. Tim Walz was approached by was asked about why he covered for Joe Biden by Jake Tapper, who covered for Joe Biden, but is writing a book about how bad Biden was, which is nuts. Cut 43.
Don't you think your party needs to acknowledge that President Biden was not up for the job of running for re-election and that this was a major mistake by the
He made that
Democrat-
decision.
I know, but you all went along with
he
the
made that
idea that he was
decision.
up for it and he wasn't. And everybody saw it and the country rejected it.
Yeah, well, look, history will tell us to go back on that. That very well could be the case,
does that
Jake.
mean?
What I'm concerned about is learning from those lessons. I would hope we would never do it again.
Okay, so what is your takeaway, Charlie? I don't want to tell you what Tim Walz thinks, or if he does. You tell me, what do you take from that answer?
Well, first of all, it looked like he was stumped by the fact that he was even being asked. It was almost like,
Is this
he
CNN?
looked up and he saw colorectal in the teleprompter. He didn't know what to say. He just stopped him dead in his tracks. But I think, I really do think that this is one of those things where you're talking long-term damage to the credibility of not just Tim Walz, but like Democrats across the board. Because, it's one thing to get caught doing something bad. It's another thing to get caught doing something where you have been so completely lying for as long as they lied about all this stuff.
He was, and I want to bring this back. He was on with Shannon Bream a couple of weeks before Biden dropped out, saying that he's going to be a surrogate. He's Joe Biden's the best. He's a historically
ever
great
been.
president. Yeah. So don't even think about bowing out now. And Adam Schiff saying, I only saw him in ceremonial situations.
Yeah, exactly.
Are you crazy?
Yeah.
Charlie,
Total lie.
thanks so much.
Thank
Great
you.
job on your 12 straight hours of TV.
That's right.
Back in a moment.
This is the biggest self-inflicted wound we've put on our economy in history. We're increasing inflation because the prices are higher because of the tariffs. That gives people less spending power. That means fewer jobs. Markets are looking at all of that, and they think companies are going to be worth $5 trillion less than they thought before these tariffs started. And that's just the loss to companies. If you add in the loss to consumers, a reasonable estimate would probably be something like $30 trillion.
And that is Larry Summers. By the way, to his credit, he was a critic of the rescue package. I'm not sure I think he was for the infrastructure deal, but the whole new Green Deal package, there was Inflation Reduction package during the Trump years. I think he was against that. And he thought the deficit was an issue. And what makes that different is he was Treasury Secretary and former Harvard law professor for Barack Obama. With me in studio is Taylor Riggs, co-anchor of the Big Money Show. Taylor, when I was on 15 minutes ago, I watched the market go up 800 points, and I said, what's the news? And it turned out Reuters was reporting that there'd be a 90-day pause on all the tariffs. And what did you just find out?
Well, CNBC is now just reporting that they're speaking with White House officials and saying that 90-day pause in tariffs is, quote, fake news, which is why the market then rolls back over. And we're close to back to where we started. We're down about 2% across the board. So you'd still cut your losses in half from the deep, deep lows of this morning. But again, this to me shows that the market is so desperate for any tweet, any signal that we're pulling back on some of these tariffs. Because the minute you got hints of a rumor, the NASDAQ had jumped 3 to 4%. I have never in my career seen some of these massive wild swings. At some point on the Dow, I think the swing was 3,000 points from the down up to the top. So this is a market that's very volatile, that is on edge, waiting for any news from the White House. But for now, we keep hearing that the White House is standing firm. And I hate to say this, I'm of the opinion that actually a 90-day pause isn't good. Businesses really need to be able to plan.
90 days of uncertainty.
that's an additional 90 days of like, well, now what? And what does 90 days from now look like? And I think businesses want clarity. I want to know, when are tariffs being implemented? What is the impact? If you're telling me there's a delay 90 days from now, I still can't plan for the next 90 days because 90 days from now is still more uncertain than it was today.
No question. That's what Bill Ackman asked for in that long letter to Trump, saying, I'm for this. I understand it. I'm with you. Just not this way. He said it's too much uncertainty all the way down to the dry cleaner in your neighborhood, to the business, to the bank. And Jamie Dimon had something similar. He says, even though tariffs grow up, not like this, essentially, they're saying.
Yeah,
but,
that's fair.
Right. So then my thing is, that would actually help the market is what we had ruled the soundbite of Ryan's previous before. And he said, if you could tell me a deal with Cambodia, a deal with Vietnam, that, by the way, came to the table, deal with Italy. Italy said, we will de-escalate. And then we have the Japanese foreign minister, Prime Minister came out and said on Monday he's having tough but very fair parameters are being set for negotiations with U.S. reciprocal tariffs. So this, if those deals come in, President knows a good deal when he sees it. Why does he need them all at once?
Yeah, that's a good point. I keep hearing, though, that China is the head honcho. So if you don't have China, any deal with Vietnam, Cambodia, Thailand, it sounds good, but that doesn't solve the ultimate uncertainty of China. Now, I will say what is good is since COVID, companies like Nike, companies like Apple, a few of these did diversify their supply chain.
To Vietnam.
Yes, to Thailand, to Cambodia, to absolutely Vietnam, to your point. So that would cushion the blow a little bit if we still want to put pressure on China. But again, China is the head honcho. I think to me, this comes down to, what is the goal? If the goal is a national security issue, I think Americans can really understand, I need to be making antibiotics in my country. China is not my friend. If they want to pull antibiotics, they can. They can just decide no.
Just like they came with rare earth and hurt our military.
Exactly. And then what do we do? So that I can get on board with. I think some of the messaging here is, if it's revenue, if it's not free trade, but it's about closing a deficit, we're never going to close our deficit with some of these countries. So again, I think we just need to understand a little bit more about the why behind this.
Absolutely. So here's Rand Paul. Tell me if you think this is extreme the other way. Cut 7.
Historically, tariffs have also led to political decimation. When McKinley most famously put tariffs on in 1890, they lost 50% of their seats in the next election. When Hot Smoothie put on their tariff in the early 1930s, we lost the House and the Senate for 60 years.
Interesting. So look, and now I'm starting to understand, I think, why they did tariffs before tax cuts, whereas in Trump 1.0, it was tax cuts first and then tariffs second, because we have midterms next fall, and they probably needed to get as much of this tariff stuff out before, and then hoping that tax cuts later this year will bear the brunt of some of that before voters go to the midterms next fall.
Right.
This, though, is my long-term concern. China doesn't live by 2-year, 4-year cycles. They live by 100-year cycles because they don't do elections. That's why they play the long game. And I think many Americans here are trying to understand in the short term. And that's why I don't always love talking about the markets, because the market just is trying to get me to a profit to 3 months from now. We have quarterly results coming out this Friday. Frankly, great, but that's not my long-term concern. The long-term concern, again, is reorienting the supply chain for antibiotics, rare earth minerals. China doesn't have to think in these 3-month interim. They're thinking in century long, and they're playing the long game. But that is the push-pull that we see right now.
And by the way, the Wall Street Journal has a report today that China wanted to do a deal with the president, or wanted to talk to him, but the president was not in a rush. And then when they reached out to Michael Waltz's is his equal on their side, the foreign minister, Waltz never got back to him on different things. He said he wanted to create the same type of relationship he had with Jake Sullivan. But remember, they came in with a swagger and they berated the Trump team, the Biden team early on. This is the fact that Trump team has gone cold, has unnerved China. And now we understand they are into the fight mode in terms of economic fight mode rather than do a deal. But as people have told me, and I want you to hear what Dave McCormick said. As you know, he's a global business guy. He's from Bridgewater. Now he's senator. He thinks we're better equipped now to fight China trade-wise than we were in 2017, cut 19.
Well, I think we're much better prepared to deal with it now in the following sense. What's happened since President Trump was president in 2017 was that you see many companies that have moved out of China because of the growing risk of China and built their supply chains throughout Southeast Asia or in other places. We need to bring some of those supply chains back to the United States, but we're less dependent on China than we were when President Trump was first in office, and that's in part because of the actions President Trump took then.
And we are the market they got to consume, right?
We're
the consumers of Chinese products.
We are the $20 trillion global consumer.
Yeah.
We import that much every year. It is shocking. Spot on that in part thanks to COVID as well, with all of those companies nearshoring, onshoring, diversifying out of China. We learned our lesson, but just not enough, according to the president. So again, that is the push-pull in the markets. And I think more people now than ever, obviously, I think COVID really made us question too. And I think I've brought this up with you before. If you promised me that I could have a cheap TV from China 10 years from now, my TV would be $300 instead of $400 10 years from now. Is that a trade I'm willing to make, even though it means that my daughter and my granddaughter may not have a future in this country because there may not be jobs here? That's the trade-off.
You want that explained?
Many Americans, I don't think I'm not willing to make that bet. I don't need another cheap TV from China at the expense of national security. That's what Americans understand. But again, the cost of getting there, it's going to absolutely be a bumpy road.
Yeah. What do you think of Jamie Dimon's letter? I don't know if you had a chance to digest it, but he put that out with his
briefly,
forecast.
The hyperboles. Jamie Dimon is the smartest person. They call him Fortress Diamond because he's built up a fortress, massive balance sheet that is the envy of the world. But I will say he speaks in these weather patterns. He called for hurricanes, then he called for all of these horrible weather events when it comes to the economy. So I hear him and I understand that he has insight into the consumer, but I also know that, again, they're just thinking about their books 3 months from now. What do their quarterly earnings look like? And frankly, Americans in the middle of this country don't care what your profits look like 3 months from now. They want a job.
Right. But right now, jobs are okay and oil prices are down, right?
It is. I mean,
the Fed hasn't moved.
I hope this wasn't in Trump's card, but if it is, they're brilliant. Oil's below 60, and guess what? Our 10-year Treasury is below 4%. So if we have to refinance all of our debt coming due in 3 months, and we get to do it at below 4% rather than 5%, which is where it was 6 months ago, we look brilliant. The problem is if yields and oil are falling because there's a global demand worry, then that's different. But either way, Scott Bessent said they're targeting a 10-year year below 4%, and I have to say, they got it.
Wow. I can't thank you enough. Taylor Riggs, about to host her show at noon, right? For 2 hours.
Noon to 2.
Yeah, so it's going to be exciting. I don't know what rumor's going to make the market go up or what the president's going to say. Essentially, I just want, before you go, I want you to share with what the president just put out.
Okay.
Because it's typical him. Let me see. I just had his Truth Social. Are you on Truth Social?
I am not.
I think it's a mistake for you not to be on Truth Social.
I know. I've got to get on it. I was trying to give up some social media for Lent.
He said
to fix my brain.
He said to see.
We're still looking for it.
Well, let me see. He basically said to toughen up, don't be weak.
Take your medicine, kind of that stuff. Yeah. I mean, so look, the anecdotes have been to redo this. If you need surgery, this is the patient who is being taken off the ventilator after surgery. The markets are telling you that we just went through surgery without anesthesia. That was pretty hard.
Here's what we put out an hour ago. The United States has a chance to do something that should have been done decades ago. Don't be weak. Don't be stupid. Don't be panicked. By the way, misspelled that, I think. A new party based on the weak and stupid people. Be strong, courageous, and patient, and greatness will be the result.
It's easier to do supply chain rejigs now than it will be 5 years from now. Every day we wait, it gets harder.
Right.
Because every day we wait, we get more embedded with China.
All right. And then he's pointing out different deals that could be in the works. And that's one thing I think he would love to do. Guys, got another deal announcement, another deal announcement, another deal announcement.
Desperate for an off-ramp? Let's give him an off-ramp.
Go get him, Taylor. Thanks so much. Back in a moment with your calls. 1-866-408-7669 and your rumors. Don't move. So let's bring in Congressman Bryan Steil. The chairman has got a lot in his plate. First and foremost, when we look at what's going on in the market, it's down 400 points. It was up briefly 800 points when it looked like Trump was going to put a 90-day pause on the tariffs. Chairman, welcome back.
Thanks for having me on.
So your thoughts about the tariff drama?
Well, our goal needs to be focused in on bringing in free, fair, and reciprocal trade, making sure that other countries are playing fairly with the United States. The president's actions give us an opportunity to be able to hold China accountable, and that requires working with our allies to hold China accountable, who for years have been abusing trade practices to the detriment of American workers and American farmers. And so my hope is that the president can get to the end game, negotiate the deal, and deliver for American farmers and workers to the benefit of the United States, and forcing China to ultimately be held accountable.
Well, yeah, we'll see where that goes because there's more countries involved in that. The whole world is involved now. And the president is talking to Japan. He just announced that on Twitter. Cambodia, Vietnam have reached out. We also know that Italy says we want to de-escalate and get conversations immediately, and UK is saying all the right things. France is not. They look to retaliate. Maybe the EU will retaliate wholly, and maybe by the end of the day, they're meeting right now. So do you think the president wants to cut a deal, or do you think he wants to hold out for the tariff revenue?
Well, my hope is that we hold out and we cut a deal. I think it's to the benefit of all of us, in particular hardworking American families, that we get to the end game, which I hope is free, fair, reciprocal trade. I'd rather do that than focus in on tariffs as a revenue source. Yes, they generate revenue, but I'm far more focused in on making sure that other countries are buying the products we're making. Big picture. Washington really has a spending problem, not a taxing problem. And so the focus needs to be in on reducing spending in Washington, not on raising revenue.
All right. So here, our revenue is all-time high, but so is our spending, and it never came down from the pandemic. Howard Lutnick was on, and these guys are all competent. They're all fully bought into the Trump agenda, but I do think they're wondering what the president wants. And this is what I'm talking about. Cut 12.
Just to be clear, April 9th, the so-called retaliatory tariffs, the reciprocal tariffs, I should say, are those coming, or are they open to negotiation?
The tariffs are coming. He announced it, and he wasn't kidding. The tariffs are coming. Of course they are.
All right. So they're coming, but this doesn't mean it won't negotiate. For example, if the market could see victories with nations that aren't China, I know China will be the hardest. Do you think they'll respond positively and get people a little calmer?
Well, I think that's our opportunity, is to have the president strike deals with some of our allies around the globe. It's positive news that Japan is reaching out, a great ally of the United States, and we may be in a position to strengthen our trade relationship and making sure that Japan is buying products from the United States. It's really China that is the worst abuser of trade practices around the globe. Former administrations have refused to hold China accountable, and the actions taken by the president puts him in a position to strike deals with our allies and then to turn the full attention of the globe upon China and address the abuse of the trade practices that China has been doing for decades.
Yeah, I mean, China is the issue now. They've hit us back with 34%, but it looks like China needs our market. And there was a big story in the Wall Street Journal today. The president was in no rush to talk to him. Mike Waltz was not in a rush to answer the call from his counterpart over on China. And we have not sent envoys over there, nor have we set up that meeting at Mar-a-Lago that he had the first time around. Is that an intentional strategy?
Well, that could very likely be a negotiating tactic by the president. I think that makes sense. He's not going to want to walk over and rush and appear as if he's nervous or looking to remove them immediately, although the negotiations that may be taking place may set him up to do just that. So, again, we're seeing multiple countries reaching out to the White House, asking for negotiations, putting the president in a position to deliver a victory for American trade, again, with the gorilla in the room being China and the abuses that they have taken, ignoring the fundamental treaty agreements that they have regarding trade, where they're subsidizing key industries, where they are manipulating their currency. It's ultimately, at the end of the day, positioning us, I believe, to work with our allies and address the abuse from China.
Right. So right now on the House, you guys have finally worked it out. I guess Congresswoman Luna said when a woman gives birth, she should be able to remote vote. And the speaker said, essentially, can't do that because it's a slippery slope. And then all of a sudden someone turns an ankle. They have a family issue. They have a problem with their plane. Or what about the paternity? Do you get paternity time? Next thing you know, no one will be showing up to work. But it seems as though you guys have worked it out. Can you give me the details on this?
Well, I'm sympathetic to the argument of why we want to allow people to proxy vote, but I am of the belief that you got to be there to do the job. And what do I mean by that? A lot of negotiations take place in person on the House floor. And when Nancy Pelosi put in the proxy advising of the proxy voting system, what it really did is gutted out the ability of members to negotiate and further empowered then Speaker Nancy Pelosi. This goes back to more of a gentleman's agreement, which has existed in the Senate and previous times existed in the House, where two people would both sit it out on each side, respecting the fact that something may be occurring in someone's personal life. Maybe it's something celebratory, like having the birth of a child. Maybe it's something that's far more upsetting to a family, where it could be a spouse or an individual diagnosed with a serious degree of cancer. And so bringing back the gentleman's agreement where two people could sit it out for a vote, allowing an individual to be home for a reasonable reason, I think is actually a pretty good middle-of-the-ground approach that the Speaker has put forward.
Yeah, I think it looks like it's going to work. So the SAVE Act was supposed to be on the docket last week. What could you tell us about it now?
Well, this is our opportunity, and it's on the docket this week, to actually make sure that our elections are for U.S. citizens only. Just today, there's a new report that comes out that possible non-citizens voted in the state of Michigan. We know at least one Chinese national did vote in the state of Michigan last year. We're putting forward legislation through the House that says if you are registering to vote, you simply need to prove that you're a United States citizen. We know millions of individuals are in this country illegally, in addition to legal immigrants inside the United States. We know the National Registration Voter Act that requires state Department of Motor Vehicles, or whatever it's called in your respective state, to hand over voting documents when driver's licenses are provided. When that bill was drafted, it was assumed that only U.S. citizens would be getting driver's licenses. But as we know, Democratic-led states, blue states like Illinois and others, are giving out driver's licenses to illegal immigrants, at which point they receive documents to vote. This is absolutely nuts. So the bill, the SAVE Act, fixes the NVRA, makes it where it's an American first, preserving the priority that only U.S. citizens can vote in U.S. elections. We have a big opportunity to bring it forward. I'll remind all of the listeners that there were actually a couple Democrats who voted with us on this, and the reason that that's important is because now when this bill goes over to the United States Senate, unlike with then Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, a Democrat, refusing to bring it up, we have an opportunity to have this bill brought up in the Senate and either hold our Democratic senators accountable for failing to vote for it or get the hard work of finding possibly 7 Dems who would allow us to sign this into law.
You know what's interesting is 70% of the public thinks you should have voter ID. So I don't even know who they're sticking up for. You also talked about, too, when it comes to fundraising, you've done an investigation into Act Blue, and it seems a lot of their fundraising standards are lower. Therefore, you have a lot of people from outside the country contributing.
Yeah, this is one of our big challenges, is how do we make sure Americans have confidence in our election system, and in particular in the campaign finance system. If you're like me, I think there's way too much money in politics. But at an absolute minimum, we should be able to be confident that it is not foreign money in our elections. I began an investigation into Act Blue, that large Democratic online fundraising platform, began looking at their security protocols. And what did we discover? We discovered that Act Blue had incredibly lenient security protocols in place. So, for example, at the very beginning, we discovered Act Blue was not even requiring that 3 or 4-digit code on the back of your credit card, a CVV number, that you have to type in almost any time you buy something online. Act Blue wasn't automatically rejecting prepaid cards from high-risk countries. And so our investigation continued on. We joined in with the Judiciary and Oversight Committees as well, as we have identified significant lacks protocols in place that don't give us confidence is exactly how Act Blue is raising these funds. Act Blue and other online platforms need to dramatically improve their standards, and we need to pass legislation to force them to do it.
You have 237 individual donations were made from foreign IP addresses?
Yeah, we have a lot of evidence that their protocols would allow abuse of the system, and it's why our investigation continues. When you see foreign IP addresses, in theory, that could be a U.S. citizen on vacation who decides that's the moment in time they want to make a donation. But in practice, we also know that that is a highly suspect transmission of funds into Democratic campaigns and needs to be fully investigated.
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll see what happens this week. When you saw the Senate version of the big, beautiful bill, were you as upset as Jody Arrington?
Well, I viewed it as woefully inadequate on savings to the spending problem that we have in Washington. We talked about that a little bit earlier as it relates to tariffs. Washington has a massive addiction to spending, and that blew the roof off as we entered the COVID pandemic period. Simply returning to pre-pandemic numbers would dramatically improve our position and our ability to get the country back on track. The House version takes a substantive step forward. The Senate version of this legislation is woefully inadequate. That said, the bill that came before the Senate is not actually the lawmaking exercise itself. It's really a step in the process that unlocks the keys to reconciliation, allowing us to actually pass the legislation. And so step one, let's get a budget reconciliation bill that is simply a procedural step to get us to the final part.
Right.
But the Senate bill is woefully inadequate.
Well, what would you cut? What do you want to cut? Because you have to. Everyone knows you got a defense spend, but they got to just fix their spending practices with the Pentagon. But like, where else would the House want to cut?
Well, I think we have huge opportunities as we look at both protecting key programs, Social Security, Medicare, but then as we look at other programs, we have seen significant abuse inside programs like Medicaid. It's not cutting the program, it's looking at the end result. States like Wisconsin maintain reasonably high standards for an individual to be able to gain access to Medicaid. But we've also seen states like California abuse the process. So California has removed the asset test to gain access to Medicaid. What does that gobbledygook mean? It means how much money you have should be a factor as to whether or not you're allowed to get on the Medicaid rolls in the first place. And so California, for example, to show you a radical example, an individual could win a multi-million-dollar lottery win in the state of California, yet still be eligible to go on the rolls for Medicaid in that state because they don't even test for assets. So we need to make sure that we are putting programs in place to truly protect the most vulnerable, and that program was set up for women and children.
But you don't. So the Senate didn't look into it
to help people get on their feet.
The Senate didn't even address that, is what you're saying.
The Senate bill does not put that forward. And again, the Senate bill is not a lawmaking exercise. It's going to unlock the keys for step two, where we can actually make these types of reforms.
Right. But do you think when Jody Arrington comes out and says how woeful it is, do you think that is something that could be handled by a phone call? And do you think that just jumps on critics and gives anti-Trumpers something to go on?
No, I think it's really part of the messy process of unlocking the keys to reconciliation, allowing us to get through the 60-vote hurdle in the Senate. And so this is a procedural step in the process. I don't love the Senate bill, but the bottom line is it's not the final bill, meaning this is really unlocking us in a position to have that negotiation to make sure we're getting these savings. It's going to be a bit of a messy process because many of us are on the conservative side saying the spending in Washington is wildly out of control, and the Senate bill just simply does not set us up for as much success as I would like to see.
Plenty of growth, but doesn't have to pay for is with the no tax on tips and the no tax on Social Security, right?
Exactly, and that's all going to be part of this big, beautiful bill that'll be negotiated out from the tax perspective as well as the spending side.
Last question. What is the earliest you could see it being done?
Well, I'm of the view we need to get all of us in the room, and that's going to involve, obviously, the administration as well. I would love to hit this deadline of Memorial Day at the end of May. I don't know how practical that is, but the sooner we all get in the room, including the administration, the House, the Senate, the administration, the more likely we are to be successful in getting this through quickly.
I just don't know what is more important than that, and I think you agree with me. Congressman Bryan Steil, thanks so much. Republican out of Wisconsin, appreciate it.
Thank you.
President Trump, the White House, and the House and the Senate, we're working every day together. We're very close. We're wanting to deliver this one big, beautiful, glamorous bill that President Trump has been talking about for the American people, so we can put the DOGE cuts in there, we can get fiscal responsibility under control, and we can look towards to balance our budget.
So that's what they're talking about. They had a vote-a-rama on Friday to outline the budget, where the president will be probably one of the biggest impacts of his 2 terms, because it's going to lock in all the price cuts and the tax cuts from last time, and will lock it in permanently. So then someone has to come in and redo it. So that means the Democrats got to come in with a 60-vote margin and be able to redo it. We'll see if that even happens, especially if the economy's booming when Trump leaves. No one's going to redo it. So they knew these tax cuts were expiring, and they knew the next president would have that option. If they don't renew the tax cuts, there'll be the biggest tax increase in American history. So the question is, what did they agree on with the Senate? They unlocked reconciliation, so made it eligible to be passed with a simple majority vote. The tax cut extensions, that's fine. But what they also did is put in the no tax on tips and no tax on Social Security. They put spending cuts. Well, the specific cuts aren't fully detailed. The resolution includes instruction for committees to adjust spending. It directs the House and Ways Committee to propose a $4 trillion increase in the debt limit. That will give them some breathing room for a few years. So it goes into detail. But it didn't take long for the House to answer back. Chip Roy said on a conference call that he was opposed to what the Senate put out. You had a few others speak up. Susan Collins joined Rand Paul in opposing the budget resolution from the Senate side. And then you have others who spoke up. I personally find it interesting. If you told me Democrats were upset with the spending bill and weren't going to sign with it, it's okay. But if you're like on a team and you're trying to work out the best deal possible, why is it beneficial to come forward and just put down what the guys have been working out? So Senator James Lankford was asked about this week. Cut 28.
Do you think that President Trump's budget bill, his agenda, is in real trouble?
It's not. It's not. Let me say the difference here. People are going to look at the Senate budget and say, you're not reducing enough spending on this. We got to reduce a lot more spending. And we're all nodding our heads going, yes, we do have to reduce a lot. But a budget bill, as it comes out, is this wide framework to say, let's get started. There's no detail in it. And everybody says, where's all the detail? There is no detail in a budget. It's just a framework. The next stage is when we go on to detail. So this bill simply allows us in the process to go to the next bill. Most Americans don't track the process. They want to know what the product is at the end.
Yeah, and Jody Arrington, who on the Senate side, who's gotten the head of the Budget Committee, he's not thrilled with what he saw there. All right, okay, that's fine. But can you just say, here's where we're different? Do you have to come out and make headlines? Because every Democrat's waiting for Trump's agenda to fall apart. Trump immediately hopped on the line and started pushing for the House to pass the Senate version. President doesn't care about the details. I don't have a problem with that. You had a previous president that did nothing except sign these bills when they came to his desk. He outlined absolutely nothing, just screamed about a few things and said things like, Jim Crow 2.0 about what happened in Georgia with the voting reform that happened in Georgia. So I think that's pretty interesting. Mark Wayne Mullen, you heard from. Senator John Barrasso was asked about Jody Arrington specifically because he has so much power on the House side. Cut 27.
Jody Arrington, the budget chairman, called it unserious and disappointing, accused your Republican colleagues of creating $6 trillion in new costs and a mere $4 billion in enforceable cuts. Is this headed for failure in the House?
No. We are united in what we believe in terms of making sure we have a nation that is safe and prosperous. The Speaker of the House and the leadership of the House came out and endorsed what we have done and said, hey, we ought to move ahead and take that
Five
next
Republicans
step.
have come against
so
it.
what we have
Pretty
seen,
narrow margin.
But they all agree with what we want to do, which is unleash American energy to get energy prices down for people. They all agree that we ought to make sure that we don't have these $4 trillion tax increases. They all want to make sure we secure the border. So all of the parts of what we have here are part of what we want to have done.
So they're going back and forth on it. And still, even though you hear about the House passing their framework and the Senate passing their framework, nobody's even talking about passing this in the spring, which really bothers me. I mean, what else are you doing? Raising the tax ceiling. You got to tell these people to stay in over the weekends, not go home, work hard, get things done. There's plenty of time in your life to go relax. But it's not going to happen now. And if they go home in the summer like they do most of August, There's no excuses for that. They got to pass this thing, and there's so many other things to do. And that's why I have no sympathy when now it's Chuck Grassley, who I really like, comes out and says, well, I want to pass a resolution that says the White House has to come to us for any tariffs. You can't even keep up with the White House. They're doing so many things at one time because they know that they have very little time. The Senate's got to get that message, and to a degree, so does the House. All right, don't forget, I want to see you in Dayton, Ohio. History, Liberty, and Laughs with Fox Nation. In person, BryanKilmeade.com on stage.